There we go. Yeah, the robot didn't sound. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Coney. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Manager for CRISP. Today is the third Pets as Pests webinar focusing on cats. If you missed the first two webinars focused on aquarium releases and the pet trade, they're both on the CRISP YouTube channel and also on our website under presentations with tons of other great information about invasive species here in the Catskills. And I'd just like to say, while we all love our feline companions, the harm that they can do to the native ecosystem here in the Catskills and the broader US and even worldwide can't be overlooked. Today, Grant Sizemore from the American Bird Conservancy is here to discuss how best to keep cats and the environment safe. Grant Sizemore has earned a degree in zoology and environmental science from Miami University in Ohio and an MS in wildlife ecology and conservation from the University of Florida. He has worked in wildlife conservation policy, education, and research for over 15 years and is a certified wildlife biologist. Grant is currently the director of invasive species programs at the American Bird Conservancy, where he runs the Cats Indoors program. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them out, or there'll be time at the end to ask questions. But over to you, Grant.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, all of you who are attending. It's great to be here and chat about a really interesting and often unique perspective regarding invasive species management, which is regarding domestic cats. So, broadly, the issue is we've got too many cats for the number of homes that actually want one. So how do we effectively manage those cats that are owned as well as those cats that are unowned, and all of which are roaming in the environment? So today I'm going to talk about some of the conservation and public health underpinnings, the ecology essentially of domestic cats, and the crisis that exists regarding roaming domestic cats across the United States and really globally also. So at the end of this, I hope all of you can become advocates for keeping cats indoors and join with American Bird Conservancy in our Cats Indoors program to be models of appropriate behavior in our communities and advocate for responsible cat management policies in our areas. So let's see if I can advance the slide here. All right, real quickly, just to introduce American Bird Conservancy, we are a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the conservation of native birds and their habitats throughout the Americas. So we work across the Western Hemisphere to tackle the biggest challenges facing birds. And, one of the strongest data points we have that really emphasizes the urgency of bird conservation needs in the Americas is from this study that was published in 2019. Maybe you heard of it. It made headlines that indicated we have lost about 3 billion birds in the last 50 years in the United States and Canada. So we have seen tremendous declines in even common species, or once common species. And it indicates, we have a lot of work to do to recover bird populations across the United States and Canada, and really throughout the Americas. There was a coalition that was put together with American Bird Conservancy and others to try and identify, many of the actions that we can all take to increase bird populations to enable them to recover. You can see those 7 simple actions here on the right side of the screen, one of which, of course, is keep cats indoors, and we're going to talk a little bit about that moving forward. So an overview of today's talk. Like I said, we're going to talk about the ecology of domestic cats, including their role as a predator, an introduced predator in the environment, as well as the public and wildlife health implications of cat introductions in the environment, and then a little bit about what we can do to manage domestic cat populations responsibly for the benefit of cats, people, and wildlife. And so if there's one message I can really leave with you today, it's, as Sarah mentioned, domestic cats can make wonderful pets. I got a cat myself, but they cause significant harm to birds and other wildlife when they are roaming outdoors. And so management of our pets, of domestic cats, is essential. And that's really the theme of American Bird Conservancy's Cats Indoors program. So I want to just make sure we're on the same page regarding some terminology that I'll be using today. I keep saying domestic cat, and I just want to emphasize that domestic cat is really the common name for the species Felis catus. It doesn't have any sort of reference on whether or not a cat is tame. It is just the common name of all cats. So everything, whether it's in the house or it's roaming outdoors, it is a domestic cat. And then there are different types of cats based on behavioral characteristics, and that can be free-ranging cat or free-roaming cat, or at-large cat, or just a roaming cat. And then, of course, there's cats that are not free-ranging, those indoor cats, for example. And so a subset of free-ranging cat are stray cats, feral cats. Stray cats are typically habituated to people. They may be lost or have been abandoned. Feral cats are existing in a wild state, just like any other feral animal that might exist. So with that in mind, let's talk about the domestication of domestic cats. They were domesticated about 10,000 years ago, give or take, and they come from the Near East, so the Middle East, North Africa region. Their nearest wild ancestor is the Near Eastern wildcat, which you can see pictured, very similar. And of course, there are wildcats, native wildcats throughout Europe and Asia, but the domestic cat has a very close affiliation with people, of course, and that affiliation has led to its spread across the globe. This is a study that looked at cats on islands. So in addition to all of these islands that have been infiltrated, we might say, by domestic cats, or where they have been introduced by people, of course, they are on every single continent around the world except Antarctica. So I think one of the things that makes domestic cats such a unique introduced species in local environments is that they are an instinctive predator. And anybody who's had a cat has undoubtedly witnessed this behavior. So if you play with your cat with a feather toy or a laser pointer or a ball of string, that cat is engaging in predatory behavior. That's an instinctive predatory response. They see movement and they want to grab it. And frequently the cat will attack the feather toy, like in this picture, with its front paws. It might bite it, it might kick it with its hind legs. And that is lethal behavior when it occurs outside. It's fine with a feather toy or a ball of string, but the same type of behavior occurs when cats are roaming outdoors with a small bird or a small mammal or lots of different types of wildlife. And so we have to keep that in mind. It's one of the ways that cats can become much more impactful as an introduced predator than some other species that we might consider. Another thing to keep in mind is that cats have this very close association with people, so they have a distinct advantage over wild predators. So many times wild predators will reach some sort of equilibrium with the native prey in the area. And so when prey populations decline, the predator population declines. That's not the case with domestic cats, because domestic cats have access to plenty of food, to clean water, to shelter, to veterinary care in many cases. They have a distinct advantage over similarly sized wild predators, as well as the species that they might prey upon. And this has led to incredible harm in local ecosystems. You can see on the left, there is this study called the Kitty Cam study. It was published in 2013 out of University of Georgia. They put some video cameras on cat collars and just watched what they got up to, recorded it. And these were well-fed cats, owned cats that just had access to the outdoors. And what was interesting, not so much that they killed lots of different prey items like this eastern phoebe and chipmunk, but it's that only about 23% of all prey killed were returned to the home. And so that means that owners who say, well, my cat only kills one bird a month or something like that, you actually have to multiply that by 4 or 5 times to get the true impact of that cat in the environment. And there's been other work out of North Carolina State University that looked at the impact of domestic cats, owned domestic cats, in local environments to see how it compared to native predators. And what they found was that domestic cats had an increased level of predation on wildlife of 2 to 10 times that observed with similarly sized wild predators. And part of that is because they're such efficient, effective predators. Again, it's instinctive prey drive, a response that they have, but also because they exist at such high densities. There are just far more domestic cats in a given area than you would find with native predator species. I also want to mention in New York, for example, these cats are, in addition to killing them directly, because of the load of bacteria in a cat's mouth, frequently prey are killed or end up dying, even if the cat doesn't sit there and consume the individual animal. And wildlife rehabilitation facilities frequently see a lot of these victims of cat attacks and will try to treat them. But research has repeatedly found that a majority of the prey items, the individual animals that are brought into wildlife rehabilitation facilities, end up dying as a result of cat attacks. And there was a study in 2021 that found that there was a 69% bird mortality rate at New York wildlife rehabilitation facilities as a result of cat attacks. The majority of those were passerines. A majority of the bird intakes were passerines, so that's songbirds. And really the takeaway message here is that owned cats, if they have access to the outdoors, will still kill wildlife and can have really large impacts in local environments. And so how does that large impact stack up against other human-caused impacts in the United States and Canada? And you can see it adds up to a lot. This is from a study that reviewed various direct sources of human-caused bird mortality. So that excludes climate change, it excludes habitat loss and degradation. But among the direct human-caused bird mortality sources, cats were identified as number one, both in the United States and Canada. This is a log scale, though, and I want to just give you a little more perspective on what that looks like, at least in the United States. It's not even close when compared to the other direct sources of a human-caused bird mortality. So, if we want to be serious about saving birds, we need to address the very real impacts that domestic cats are having when they're roaming the environment. And all of this predation adds up to incredible numbers and is consistent around the world with other studies that have been conducted. In the United States, it's about 2.4 billion birds that are killed by domestic cats every year, 12.3 billion mammals. But around the world, it ranges from hundreds of millions to billions of individual animals in various taxa that are killed by domestic cats every year. So domestic cats have just an enormous impact in the environment when they're allowed to roam. So all of this predation has not only impacts for individuals, but also impacts for populations and up to species level impacts as well. Domestic cats have contributed to the extinction of 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles worldwide. They account for 26% of all bird, mammal, and reptile species extinctions caused by invasive species and remain a principal threat to 430 species of threatened and endangered birds, mammals, and reptiles. I think one of the best examples, a little case study, I guess, of the speed with which cats can impact wildlife populations is with the Stevens Island wren, or Lyle's wren, in New Zealand. And this happened in the 1890s, where a lighthouse keeper was assigned to man the lighthouse and brought along his cat. And so one day his cat, which people think is named Tibbles brought home a bird in its mouth. The lighthouse keeper was a bit of an amateur ornithologist. He didn't know the species. He sent it off to a museum in London, I think, for identification. They confirmed it was a brand new species unknown to Western science. And within just a couple of years, that entire species was wiped out by Tibbles and its offspring. So it just underscores the severity of impacts that cats can have when hunting native native prey, native species, and just how quickly those impacts can stack up to really irreversible declines and extinctions. So they are among the world's most harmful invasive species listed in the Global Invasive Species Database. They're among the world's most harmful as identified by the IUCN, or International Union for Conservation of Nature. Now, we've talked about cats as predators and how they can impact wildlife directly, but let's also talk a little bit about how they can impact wildlife indirectly, and that's through changing behaviors and changing the function or composition of various wildlife communities and of ecosystems. And so we've seen in research that where cats are present, this graph on the left, where cats were present in these ecosystems or these habitats, this was in California, that there were fewer birds, fewer native rodents, and many more non-native rodents. So it changes the composition of the community of species that are represented in a given area by just introducing domestic cats. And of course, we want fewer non-native species. We want more native species. We've also seen in this graph on the bottom right that when domestic cats are present in an environment, this was done in California, they were looking at different habitat sizes, fragmented habitats, smaller ones versus larger ones. And what they found was in the smaller habitats, smaller intact units of habitat, that there were far fewer birds. In fact, they found extirpations, so complete losses of ground nesting birds as a result of domestic cats being present. But in the larger habitat fragments where coyotes were present, the coyotes, which will kill domestic cats, actually limited that predation pressure, and the ground nesting birds were still around. We also have research that has indicated that domestic cats change the behavior of birds in this case, but undoubtedly other wildlife as well. They found that when domestic cats were present near a nest of common blackbirds, this was done in the UK, that the parents of chicks provided only 1/3 as much food to the chicks in the nest as they normally would, and that there was actually an increased likelihood of predation on that nest by another predator by an order of magnitude. And that's because the adults are having to engage in anti-predatory response, anti-predatory behavior. They see the domestic cat, they're calling, trying to get it away, trying to protect their nest. And what happens is another predator is then alerted to the presence of that nest and can come in and take it. So all in all, domestic cats roaming in the environment, whether they be predators, depredating native wildlife directly or having these indirect impacts on other species, are a very bad thing. So we've talked about cats as predators, but something that we also have to keep in mind regarding domestic cats when they're introduced into environments is the various parasites and diseases that they can carry. And a number of them are zoonotic, and that is, they can be transmitted to people. So there's a great resource available through the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, this toolkit to address free-range domestic cats on agency lands. And this table was taken from that toolkit, that publication. You can see there are a lot of diseases that are identified within domestic cats. This is just tackling some of the viruses, but there are a lot of other diseases and parasites that are mentioned in that resource. I'm not going to talk about all of those, but I do want to talk about a few of those today. One of them being rabies. I'm sure you all are aware that rabies is a big problem in the eastern United States, in New York, as well as Pennsylvania. I mean, really across up and down the eastern seaboard. But you can see that domestic cats, well, broadly in the United States, domestic cats are the #1 carrier of rabies among domestic animals. They have outpaced dogs since 1988, I think, in part because we have done such a good job of implementing dog control ordinances, regulations, policies, such as leash laws and mandatory vaccination. But we have not done any of that virtually with domestic cats, aside from vaccinations, which tend to not be enforced, which we'll see here in a minute. But you can see the distribution of rabid cats across the United States in this image on the bottom. Then if we look up to New York, you can see this sort of heat map of where there have been confirmed rabid domestic cats in New York State, which tends to occur in the southeast and southern portions of New York, not so much as you get to the northern part of the state. But there is a disproportionate risk associated with domestic cats. So domestic cats, I mentioned they're the #1 source of rabies among domestic animals. They are definitely not the #1 source overall. Wildlife remain confirmed rabid far more frequently than domestic cats. However, domestic cats are far more likely to expose people to the disease than wildlife, in part because we're much more likely to try and interact with an unknown cat than we are with a raccoon or a skunk or whatever. Not too many people are trying to pet those animals, hopefully. Whereas a domestic cat, they might just think, oh, it's, just the stray cat, or it's my neighbor's cat, or, must lived in that neighborhood or something. And they try and pet it, and then suddenly they're exposed to rabies. Cat bites them or whatever, and they have no idea if it's rabid, if it's ever been vaccinated, no knowledge, and they have to go get post-exposure prophylaxis, a series of shots, which are expensive and not too fun. So one thing we have to keep in mind with rabies is it is fatal once symptoms arise, which is why we are so proactive about administering post-exposure prophylaxis and why these exposures are so dangerous for public health. This image on the left, which is actually taken from Pennsylvania, so a neighboring state, but it shows the exposure risk to people by various species with regard to rabies. And you see cats are much higher than all other species. So domestic cat rabies remains a huge risk, especially in the eastern portion of the United States where the raccoon rabies virus variant is endemic. So I want to show you the breakdown of rabies in New York State from 2001 through 2021. You can see that domestic cats, these red bars, are, again, it's not even close. They are much more likely. There's a much higher likelihood of a cat testing positive, or many more cats that test positive for rabies than other species of domestic animals. And you can see here the percentage of cats as a representation of all domestic animals that test positive for rabies. And it's very high. And unfortunately, it is increasing slightly. So cats are continuing to represent a higher proportion of the total number of domestic cats, or of domestic animals that are confirmed for rabies. So clearly, we are not doing something with cats that we appear to be doing for other species. Again, dog control laws really help out for dogs, and they are lacking for cats. And this trend also is observed for cats as a total percentage of all rabid animals. There is an increase. So there is a definite need for addressing the rabies virus risks associated with cats. Now, I'm also going to show you, I mentioned we're going to talk about vaccination here. To be vaccinated for rabies, an animal must be given an initial vaccination, vaccinated after 1 year, and then vaccinated every 1 to 3 years, depending on which vaccine they have. So we can see the breakdown of cats that are actually currently vaccinated for rabies. And this is for submissions to the New York State Department of Health between 2008 and 2020 for rabies exposure. You can see that the number of owned cats vaccinated for rabies was certainly higher than unowned cats and cats whose ownership was unknown. However, when we look at the number that were known to be not currently vaccinated, the number that were vaccinated is dwarfed by quite a bit. And so we're not doing a very good job of keeping our cats currently vaccinated for rabies. And then if you add in, of course, the number that were also unknown vaccination, You can see that it really pales in comparison, especially if you combine not currently vaccinated and unknown vaccinations. The number that are currently vaccinated, which is standard practice and required, is a very small percentage. Currently vaccinated is lowest among all ownership types. And one thing to point out is there were 150% more unowned rabid cats with human contact, human exposures than owned rabid cats. So that, having unowned cats of unknown rabies vaccination roaming around is a huge public health risk because so many of them expose people to rabies. All right, we're going to move on from rabies now and talk a little bit about another disease called toxoplasmosis. So this is a disease caused by infection with the parasite Toxoplasma gondii. You can see the life history of it here on the right, the life cycle. So it relies on felines, including domestic cats, to complete its life cycle. It can only sexually reproduce in the gut of a felid. So that's domestic cats, bobcats, mountain lions, tigers, lions, whatever. For our purposes, we're going to talk exclusively about domestic cats. And domestic cats far outnumber all other felines in the United States. So what happens is a domestic cat will host the parasite in its gut. The parasite reproduces, and then it is excreted into the environment. Its eggs, essentially, they're called oocysts. These oocysts are excreted into the environment through cat feces. A single cat can excrete hundreds of millions of these tiny little oocysts, and they remain infectious for months to years in the environment, whether they are in terrestrial, freshwater, marine systems. They can then infect any warm-blooded species, any bird, any mammal that would accidentally ingest or inhale one of these oocysts. And we're not talking about something that's eating cat feces necessarily, although that is a risk, and I highly advise you don't do that. But we're talking about, the feces will degrade and the oocysts will remain. They will persist in the environment for a long time, far after the feces is removed. And so it is an environmental contaminant to have these oocysts excreted into the environment where they can infect a large variety of species. And so they get into the food chain then and can be transmitted in utero or by consumption of infected tissues of another species. But eventually, the goal of Toxoplasma gondii, the parasite, is to get back into a cat or a feline and then have a chance to sexually reproduce again. And so one of the really interesting things about Toxoplasma gondii is it is a bit of a zombie parasite. It can modify the behavior of its host. And this has been observed in rodents where the studies have been conducted. They found that rats that were infected with Toxoplasma gondii chose to spend more time in an environment where there was a cat presence. They used cat urine. And rodents, the rats would normally be wary, would not want to spend time in an environment where there's sign of cat urine. But what happened was when they're infected with toxo, suddenly it changes the inner workings of their brain, and they become stimulated by that cat urine and want to spend time in that environment, thus increasing the likelihood of interaction with a cat and then consumption and then the chance to sexually reproduce in the cat again. It's a really interesting little parasite, but it is a big public health and wildlife health and domestic animal health problem. For people, again, it can cause a whole wide variety of problems. You can see in this table on the bottom left, some of the consequences of infection have been broken down. A note on schizophrenia and other neurodegenerative diseases. There are associations with those diseases like schizophrenia. It's unclear whether toxo infection causes it or you're more likely to get toxo infection. That's still being worked out. But again, there is that association, and we know that Toxoplasma gondii does change brain behavior in a wide variety of species, including people. So this is a major public health problem with the number of domestic cats roaming outdoors, and we're talking about over 100 million in the United States, and hundreds of millions of oocysts that are excreted in the environment. Man, the potential for infection is big. And we know that toxoplasmosis is the second leading cause of death among foodborne illnesses in the United States after salmonella. So this is serious. And again, that's by eating the tissues of animals that have been infected with Toxoplasma gondii. You can also, if you're thinking, oh, I'll just avoid meat, it can also contaminate produce through organic or conventional production in farmers markets and in retail stores, grocery stores. So again, as an environmental contaminant, domestic cats excreting Toxoplasma gondii into the environment is a huge problem. And we need to do a much better job of becoming aware of this issue. Too frequently, people have only heard of it because a doctor says avoid changing cat litter while you're pregnant. But of course, a domestic cat roaming outdoors, the entire environment becomes a litter box. And so again, as one of the ways it impacts other species I just want to highlight is white-tailed deer. Of course, there are lots of white-tailed deer in your region. A study in Northern Ohio found that about 60% of white-tailed deer were infected with Toxoplasma gondii. And then again, these are species that are not necessarily interacting with domestic cats. They just happen to be in an environment where domestic cats roam, and then they become infected as a result of the long-term environmental contamination from toxo. So a couple of other parasites and diseases that I want to mention for New York State, one from Rockland County, another from upstate New York. The one from Rockland County found about endoparasites in what they're calling domestic and community cats, or stray cats, really is what they're defining community cats as. They demonstrated that stray cats in the county have the potential to spread and infect humans and other animals with a wide variety of endoparasites, obviously stuff you don't want to get. And then this other study on the bottom, Lucio Forster from 2011, found a large number of fecal-borne parasites from upstate New York and domestic cats, things like Cryptosporidia, Toxoplasma gondii, which causes toxoplasmosis, Toxocara, the hookworms, Giardia, things that you really just do not want to get. They found that over half of the stray cats in the Rockland County study, over half of the stray cats tested positive for roundworms, which again is a zoonotic parasite and may be a public health concern. So, okay, that's a lot of information on kind of the human and wildlife health. So we're going to move on just a little bit here and get back to our main point. Domestic cats can make great pets, but we have to manage them. So how do we do that? Well, we need to reduce cat populations. As I said in the beginning, there are just too many cats for the number of homes that really want a cat. We have to manage them. And that includes the unowned cats, sort of the stray cats and the feral cats that we've talked about, but also with the owned cats that might not be managed appropriately and can then move into stray and feral cat populations. And the biggest question we have to ask ourselves when we think about domestic cat management is, are those cats still roaming outdoors? Because if they are, they continue to facilitate transmission of a variety of parasites and diseases. They continue to kill wildlife, as we've seen with cats that are owned and allowed to go outdoors, even if they're well fed. So we have to consider strategies that contain cats appropriately. There are a variety of solutions to do this. I love this article from New York Times, which observes this responsible cat owner out there walking it on a leash. You can do that. It's frequently thought you only do that with dogs, but you can walk your cat on a leash, of course. You can move it around like Louie here in a stroller. These are all strategies for giving it some outdoor time in a responsible way that protects not only the cat, but the environment as well. Catios are another great and increasingly popular strategy for giving your cat some outdoor time. It's basically an enclosed cat patio, screened-in porch, more or less, for your cat. And these are all in line with recommendations by the association, the American Veterinary Medical Association, the AVMA, in their policy on free roaming owned cats. They say, please keep your cats indoors because of the problems for the environment, but also because of the problems for cats. And so we have to think about cat health and welfare as well when we're talking about cat management. I mentioned cats can be killed by coyotes. They are about 3 times more likely to be infected with parasites like ticks and fleas, which of course have other human health problems associated with them. They are exposed to a variety of traumas, injuries, diseases, the elements, etc., that can lead to an early demise of a cat. We also have to think about disease control. The National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians puts out a compendium. It's really the gold standard for rabies control in the United States. And they say very clearly, stray dogs, cats, and ferrets should be removed from the environment. They should not be allowed to roam outside because of the continuing rabies risks that they present. And of course, they have to be currently vaccinated for rabies. And then with regard to Toxoplasma gondii, any cat roaming outdoors remains a problem. So especially with management policies that maintain cats in the environment, that is a persistent risk for Toxoplasma gondii transmission to people, wildlife, and other domestic animals. Policies that, so from this Aguirre et al. 2019, policies that intentionally maintain domestic cats on the landscape facilitate and may increase the risk of disease transmission. And back to rabies real quickly, I mentioned they're a disproportionate risk for, human exposure. 16% of all post-exposure prophylaxis administration in the United States is due to cat-caused exposures. And we know from data in New York State that only 10.6% of cats that were submitted for rabies testing were vaccinated. So all of this is really in line with a One Health philosophy. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's the idea that human health, animal health, ecosystem health, environmental health are all interrelated. And we need to consider those interactions when we talk about the health of any one community. And this is really taken off in the sort of post-COVID era, but we need to think about it with regard to domestic cat management as well. I want to make a quick point about a strategy that is often promoted by certain animal shelters and advocacy groups, something called TNR, or trap, neuter, release, trap, neuter, return, trap, neuter, reabandon. And basically it's the idea that you identify domestic cats that are roaming in the environment, you trap them, you sterilize them, and then you put them back out on the landscape. There is overwhelming evidence that such strategies do not work reliably to reduce domestic cat populations. They often serve as dumping grounds for people who no longer want to take care of their cat, and they're trying to find a place where they can essentially unload their burden on someone else. And so they see where cats are being fed, and they put their cat there. And again, the point here is that these cats continue to cause harm in the environment, sterilized or not. They are killing wildlife. They are contributing to disease risks. They're causing nuisances in the environment. And one of the sort of TNR has become a bit of a perverse incentive as a result of the no-kill movement. And while no-kill shelters can serve a purpose in a community, they cannot be the only outlet for animal control in a community. You need to have open admission shelters, places where people can surrender their animal responsibly and give that animal a chance for adoption and a lifelong home. No kill, unfortunately, means that they are not open admission, they're closed admission. They'll take some animals and not others, and then they leave people stranded, essentially trying to scramble to find a way to responsibly give their cat or other animal another option. And too frequently that results in just abandonment on the landscape. So what is the solution for especially unowned domestic cats? Trap them, then adopt, place them in a sanctuary, or euthanize them, but under no circumstances should they ever be reabandoned to the outdoors. This is a domesticated animal. We owe them the opportunity to find a lifelong home and a humane death if there are no other options. Essentially, the management recommendation here is it's time to treat cats like we treat dogs. And I just want to highlight from the neighboring state of Pennsylvania, the One Health Task Force issued some recommendations regarding the management of domestic cats. And I think these would be applicable to New York as well. They include things like leash laws, requiring identification of cats, incentivizing, and I would say requiring sterilization of owned cats, unless you want to specifically breed that animal, rabies vaccinations, making sure that property owners have some outlet for dealing with cats on their property that they do not want, the ability to take it somewhere, to trap it, laws that are protecting their private property rights as well. So I'd encourage you to read through that if you have any interest in how to manage domestic cats. It's a good resource. And then I also want to mention invasive species. There are a variety of invasive species lists and outlets, and I think, although domestic cats are listed to be among the world's worst, most harmful invasive species globally, we can do more to identify them as a domestic cat, or as a as an invasive species locally. And so, this would be one location where listing domestic cats along with feral swine, Eurasian boar, which is another species just like domestic cats, came from domestication and was released, became feral, and got out into the environment. Listing domestic cats as an invasive species, recognizing their harms to the environment, would be really helpful. So, in closing, a little bit, there are ways that you can take action in your community. Becoming a bird city is one way to do that. There are a variety of recommendations and requirements for becoming a bird city, not just dealing with cats, but other ways you can protect birds in your community. You can spread the word with brochures. You can model appropriate behaviors like Atlas the Adventure Cat here on his leash. Take your cat out on a walk if you'd like. It certainly is a conversation starter. You can take the pledge to keep your cat indoors, whether it's your current cat or any future cats you might have. And you can advocate for appropriate ordinances, bylaws, policies at animal shelters and HOAs in cities and counties and at the state level that are going to protect cats and communities, whether it be wildlife communities or human communities. Again, these are things like mandatory identification, sterilization, vaccination. So please become an advocate in your community for these things. And I'll just mention a few resources, again, that are helpful for managing cats. I mentioned the toolkit to address free-ranging domestic cats on agency lands. It's a great resource. The USDA APHIS has published a resource on free-ranging and feral cats. I encourage you to check that out. And American Bird Conservancy has a program where we are happy to work with conservation land managers to provide equipment for them to trap and remove cats from the lands that they're responsible for. We'll provide traps, we'll provide cameras for them to monitor and manage cats in their location. So if you know anyone who's interested in that, please have them contact me. My contact information is available in this presentation. So finally, in review, domestic cats, great animals. I've got a cat myself. They're wonderful pets, but they're a non-native introduced species, an invasive species when introduced into ecosystems, when allowed to roam freely in the environment, and we have to manage them because they are contributing to widespread loss of biodiversity, disease exposure risks, and it's not humane for the cats nor the animals that are impacted by cats for when they're roaming outdoors. So we need advocates like you, I hope, to make those changes. Whether it be individually or as a community, it's time to treat cats like we treat dogs. Thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take questions. Again, my name is Grant Sizemore from American Bird Conservancy. Would love to chat more if you have questions now or in the future. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A or the chat. But thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. And really good to see specific examples, specific data for instances of disease transmission with the cats and their impacts on not just birds, but also our native rodents and a lot of amphibians, reptiles, everything, really.
Yeah, I typically talk about birds the most because I work for a bird conservation organization, but it's certainly not exclusive to birds. That's 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles that have been impacted by cats globally. And cats will actually consume, there was a recent study that found that cats will consume over 2,000 different species. So, it's almost like nothing is safe, unfortunately.
Yeah. We do have a question. So, Rachel is asking, are there any states, cities, etc., that have enacted any of these management efforts, such as leash laws?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. That's a good question. Yes, many of them have. So one recently in Northern Ohio, the village of Oak Harbor introduced ordinances that would require cats to be kept on a person's property, leashed if not on the property. They have to be, I think they have to be identified, sterilized. No, I don't think sterilization is required, but they have to be vaccinated for rabies. So that's one that has introduced it recently. We also worked with legislators on Kauai, so one of the counties in Hawaii, to prohibit abandonment and also to prohibit feeding of cats on county properties, because that can become, again, public properties are a hotspot for dumping animals, unfortunately. And so, and then that dumping is encouraged by knowing that people are feeding those cats. So prohibiting the feeding really helps to limit the number of cats that are abandoned at a particular site and to reduce the number of cats that exist. When you feed these cats, it increases their density, it increases their life expectancy, which enables, again, more disease transmission, because you're also probably feeding rats, foxes, well, not on Kauai, but other different types of wildlife, bringing them together, which enables disease transmission between species, and it increases the carrying capacity of that particular environment, which means you have more introduced predators in a given area than you otherwise would have. So yeah, there are a variety of locations that have enacted these types of responsible management laws. We hope more will do it. We'd love to work with you in your community to enact those.
Fantastic. That seems to be it for questions. But yeah, I'd just like to thank you again for being here and giving this talk. I love cats. I don't personally have any, but they have a huge effect on our native ecosystems, especially here in the Catskills, where we have a number of birds listed as rare, threatened, endangered, along with other rodents and reptiles. So this is an important topic. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is something, we can take action on it right now. It's not like climate change, which is kind of this nebulous thing that we have struggled to get our mind around. I mean, this is something we could fix just like that. We have the solution. We each just have to be responsible about our own cats and enact appropriate policies in our communities. Thank you very much, Sarah. Really appreciate the chance to talk today.
Yeah, of course. And thank you everyone for attending.